Well, good morning and welcome to the Valley Sports Telegram Sunday Roundup. I'll be your host, Arshavir Saryan, along with Kenny Hodges. This week we're going to be a little East Valley League heavy, as we had quite a few of them spotlighted as our gems to look out for. We're going to get rolling with our first game that we were looking at. It was the Chavez Eagles at the Kennedy Cougars. The one thing we knew before the season was Chavez was not going to be an easy win for anybody. We were expecting them to steal a few wins because of their physicality and their aggression, but we also knew they were not going to roll over for anyone. Kennedy came in with a big spotlight on them. Anytime you get a LA Times big preview, people are going to look at you and they're going to try to take you down. And that's something Kennedy's going to have to fight all season. Kenny, you were there. Let's get your takeaways.
My initial takeaways for that game were Kennedy was coming off of a loss in week 0, and they were going to want to get back on track against a team that, for the most part, people thought they would have to beat. Chavez is a young group. They're a small school, a small outfit, but their calling card is their toughness. And the way that game started to play out in the first half, it was definitely all about their toughness and how they would hang in the game against Kennedy. It was physical right from the outset, as you would expect. Kennedy's a physical bunch. They showed that in week 0, even coming up on the short end. And it was a close game, pretty much up until right before halftime, where Chavez's youth and inexperience kind of showed a bit, where they kind of were battling and staying in the game, and then a big turnover right before the half kind of ballooned the score to 22-6. Second half, Kennedy did what a team is supposed to do. That's an experienced bunch and a bunch that is expecting to do big things this season, and they came out in the second half and they put the hammer down. But that and ended up pulling away and winning the game 43-6. Speaking of both coaches after the game, they both had one similar takeaway from the game, which was it was all about who could smack who in the mouth. Chavez let you know right from the jump. I saw it. I was standing right on the side when their players walked past the Kennedy players and told them, "You're going to fight today." So they knew right from the jump it was going to be a tough matchup. But speaking to Chavez's head coach Rodrigo Nunez after the game, he said, "Hey, listen, it comes with the territory. He's purposely playing 5 sophomores on defense on the varsity level. So he knows there's times when, and you saw it during the game, where he physically have to tell players where to be, what their assignments were, because that's what happens when you're playing youth. But that's a team full of dogs, and they're going to get better as the season rolls along. We saw bits and pieces. We saw glimmers of what they could do last year, because they were in a pushover last year, and you see the toughness and the physicality sort of building in this program. Nunez said, we're a small group. We're a small school. We got to use what we have to our advantage, and that's how being a tight knit and being a tight community. And they played with heart and passion. That 43-6 wasn't really indicative of how they played. The game just kind of, as football tends to do, the game kind of gets away from you from time to time. But that's going to be a tough bunch. If you play the Chavez Eagles this year, you should expect a fight. And give Kennedy credit and kudos. They did what they were supposed to do. If you've got the talent, if you've got the horses, when you get a chance to drop the hammer, you have to. And that's what they did. They came out fast in the second half. They pushed the tempo. The first score, I think they went down the field in less than a minute, coming out of the half, and they were just running the ball. They weren't even throwing it. So it's going to be interesting to see what Kennedy kind of does beyond this. Are they going to take this momentum and keep building? They're a team that has a lot of expectation on them, and hopefully we'll see what they do going forward. They look every bit the part of a team that could challenge for a city title this year. So that were my big takeaways from that game.
Next on the docket is a game that was a sleeper, actually, in my mind. We didn't pick it up very high. We didn't tout it too much, but the big question in that game was Grant going to be what they showed in week 1 when they ran over Taft. And what was Cleveland going to do facing a team that's hungry to prove itself? And coming in, I didn't think too much was going to happen, with the Lancers. Your preview didn't have too much on it, but they definitely are showing that this is a team not just here to play, but a team looking to win. And there's no dismissing them.
Like I said, the one thing I alluded to in the preview was they lost some impact players, especially on the offensive side of the ball, both sides of the ball. But they lost a couple of guys that were impact players, and the big question I had for them was, would they be able to sort of replace that production? They showed signs last year that they could be an explosive bunch. They had a couple of wins against some top competition. But coming into this season, would you be able to replace what you lost and kind of keep pushing forward and put yourself in a position to challenge for the East Valley, which feels a little bit wide open? The most consistent team is probably going to be able to pull away and take the league. So it was going to be a question of who they were going to put in position or who would step up for them. And you were there for the game, and you saw some talent out there. I'll let you take it from there.
I walked in just after the second half because we were trying to bounce around as much as possible, and literally as I walked in, Grant was just like, "We're not taking any prisoners," and they marched down the field and scored. And then almost immediately after, here comes Cleveland marching the field. They get inside the 25 at the edge of the red zone. And the defense, it wasn't even bend but don't break. They stuffed, forced a 4 and out. And it was like, here we go. This team is going to do what it's going to do. And they did that against the team that has Donovan Powell just terrorizing now 2 weeks in a row. I mean, he went for 355 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns in the second half. And I'm going to touch more on him in a minute, but coming back to Grant, that hole was not filled by one, filled by 2 people. And these kids are seniors and they're first-time football players. I talked to Coach after the game, and he told me he was trying to get Jaquel Woodard since he was a sophomore. And Jaquel was interested in basketball. And he finally realized, was like, okay, I'm going to play some football. And Jaquel went off. He had 14 rushes, 162 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's not a kid just learning how to play football. I don't care if you're a senior. I don't care if you're, freshman in college. You don't play like that when you're just learning how to play, but he did. Mm-hmm. And then the other kid they pulled up to fill it is Johannes Tandrasia. This kid, I missed his touchdown in the first half. All right. And I made a point to ask Coach, and he told me he made contact at the 5, stood up the defender, and ran over him for a touchdown. Again, you don't expect someone playing organized football, tackle football at the high school level for the first time to do that. Second game of the season, and these kids are already putting it out there. I mean, Tandrasia ran for 110 yards. So you got 270 plus yards on the ground with these kids.
Yeah.
They are about to put the league on notice. I mean, you can't stop them. What are you gonna do? They're gonna come. They're gonna make noise.
And what's interesting about that point, I watched with my own eyes. I watched that Cleveland defense the week before against Kennedy, and Abrahamian and those talented Kennedy rushers, they made some plays, but they were getting stuffed. Like I said, Corey Hall, who's a standout for Cleveland, definitely a D1 prospect. He had 14, 15 tackles. He would refuse to let their rushers get outside and break anything. So to have these two kids the next week kind of impose their will on a team that we know brings the wood on defense, that's an impressive performance.
Yeah, I mean, touching on Corey Hall, he did Corey Hall things. He scored in the first half, and it almost seemed like they were trying to run away from him.
Oh, you have to,
right? But when he's playing center field, he's going to get to you.
Oh yeah.
And there were a couple plays, one specifically where the play broke down and the Grant quarterback ended up kind of bootlegging and hitting the sideline. And if Corey's not there, that's a 35-yard touchdown.
Yeah.
But there's Corey Hall, just standing there and ending the run. But both teams really, really serious about doing big things this year. And I'm going to touch on it because it's a really, really sore spot for Grant. And I mean, it worked out great for Cleveland. But I was there at the sticks, literally at the 1 yard line, and beautiful little fade pass. And when he comes down with it, he's across the line. He's right there.
Oh yeah.
That was a first down if I've ever seen one. And I mean, what gets me is sideline official spots the ball, looks at the sticks, calls first down. And then, the head official comes in, has a quick word with him, looks at the placement of the ball, and says, "No, we got to measure this." Okay, here come the sticks. Well, the other sideline official now is looking at the chains, and something's up. I have no idea what's going on. He went to pick it up from the marker, and the head official's like, "No, something's wrong with the marker." They went over, looked at the marker, and apparently it wasn't placed right. And so they adjusted the marker, came in, made the measurement, and we're talking less than 2 inches from a first down. The ball goes right back to Cleveland. And I said I'd touch more on this a moment ago, but this is when you have your players make your plays. I mean, the thought now on the Grant sideline is keep your head up. They're inside their 2, basically at the 1, and stuff them. You get the ball back. You'll have like 90 seconds if you can stuff them to score. Tie the game, go to overtime. But one play, they give the ball to Donovan Powell and 99 yards. I mean, he was basically untouched after he got through the first wave and just gone. And when you've got a player like that, you give him the ball. He does things, and he scored the go-ahead touchdown 5 minutes prior. And it was a little screen pass. And again, credit that Cleveland line. They didn't let anybody touch him. He broke one tackle, made a move, and went in 17 yards untouched.
So I have two thoughts on that sequence. From the footage that you got, because credit to you for being right on the spot. There are times in a football game, and mind you, I don't like beating up on referees on this level too much because we understand a lot of it is volunteer work, and we appreciate these guys getting out here and officiating these games and making sure you keep the kids safe and all that aside. one, when you see the spot as the head referee, you got to go with your guy on this that's standing on the spot there. Because to me, when you see the video, it's not close. It's not even close. If he had come down with the ball on the opposite side of his body, maybe you've got an argument. But he comes down, and great wherewithal for that receiver to come down with the ball and know where you are on the field, having that field awareness, turn your body end zone side because you know it's going to be close. You want that ball on that side. I thought he had it by 6 inches. I thought he had it by half. He had it by a few chain lengths, in my opinion, from where the ball was spotted. So for all this confusion, you got to just let the players make plays, right? Now, at the end of the day, you almost look at Grant's philosophy in that moment. Like you said, we stuff him here, we get the ball back, we can come back and tie this game. There's a thought process that you kind of have to battle there. Where do you sell out and try to stuff him? Maybe get a safety. Maybe you hit the guy in the backfield. You've kind of done a good enough job, bend don't break, of kind of keeping Powell in check, if you can call it that, for the most part. But you want to stop them there. But there's also this thing that when you feel like you got jobbed on a spot, there's almost any of us who've played, there's a certain mentality that goes into, man, I feel like I'm getting robbed, and you got to try to block that out, go back out there, because now you got a job to do. You got to go get a stop now because you got to get that ball back. So fighting against that, being upset and having to remain and take that focus back on the field and get a stop deep in your own end, all it takes is for one mistake, one missed assignment in the gap, and a guy like Powell's going to make you pay. And that felt like that's what happened in that moment. You sell out to stop the run because you know it's coming. You're not going to throw the ball that deep in your own end. You're going to run it. And that kid is special, and you don't get a hand on him. And like you say, kudos to Cleveland's line, because you know what the assignment is in that moment. At a bare minimum, we're getting a push because we don't want to get hit in the backfield. And they opened up a lane for him, and he was gone.
And it's hard enough when we're watching professionals after a missed call, and we're asking these kids to just buck the F up.
And in a game in which it's back and forth, they're fighting in their tooth and nail. They know what it means for them going forward in terms of the perception around your program.
Yep.
You go in there and knock off the team that just knocked off the team that got the LA Times piece the week before. Everybody's going to talk about you. And you're fighting and you're in there with this team tooth and nail. You know who Corey Hall is. Everyone knows. You watch the film, and you're right there. You're hanging tough with that team when people aren't even picking you. Like schlubs like me weren't even picking you to win the league. It's so tough in that moment when you feel like you're right there and you don't get what you think is justified to you to kind of lock back in, and it burned them.
Yeah. And I mean, but even in that sense, they got the ball back with less than 2:30 to go.
Yeah.
And they started marching the field again.
Yeah.
They weren't done. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's hard enough for, pros, like we said, but in this case, hard enough for pros to score 2 touchdowns in 150 seconds with less than 3 timeouts. And, you're asking the kids to fight to that last whistle, and they did. They came back. They didn't give up. They still marched another 30-plus yards, got into Cleveland territory, and, the clock ran out on them. So, yeah, it definitely was big fight feel. For me, coming out of all the games we spotlighted this week, this was the hidden gem.
Yeah.
This is the one that those of us that weren't able to see the whole game or any of the game missed a classic. You know, people on the Cleveland side are going to be talking about this for a while. You know, and people on the Grant side are going to have a chip on their shoulder now. Like, that's a game we could have won. They controlled most of the game. 3/4 of the game was played at Grant's pace.
Yeah.
So if you can do that against a team like Cleveland, imagine what you're going to do in 2, 3, 4 weeks when you get into league play. And now you got reps.
Yeah.
So,
so
yeah.
Yeah. So and moral victories. Hate them. Moral victories doesn't get you anything in the win column, right? It doesn't get you anywhere. It's not going to get you any further. But there are times where you can come out of a game and you can look around your room and say, we can play with anybody. We can play with anybody. We didn't get the bounces this week, but when we take the field next week, someone's getting their butt kicked. And that can take you a long way. Like you said, what Grant is doing now in non-league play, when they get in the league, they aren't going to see anybody they're going to be scared of, just based on what they've been able to do here early on. So kudos to both teams. Kudos to Cleveland. Like I said, getting out of the gate 2-0. It's going to be fun watching them going forward because they definitely built something here where they're going to be a real challenger in the city, especially, we'll get into it later on, what it could potentially mean in their own league later on. And the same thing to Grant. Kudos to them. They're a tough team. Maybe I undersold them, but won't be doing that going forward.
No. And I mean, undersold, that was leading to questions. I mean, and talking about questions, Chatsworth came into this weekend with question marks everywhere. I mean, they racked up over 200 plus yards. It was something like 250 yards of penalties last week against Monroe, and took what most anybody would call as a bad loss. But credit to Monroe last week. They capitalized. They did what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
When your opponent is racking up 250 yards of penalties, your job is to capitalize. And they did, and they walked away with the win. But back to Chatsworth, they came out with a mission. The scoreline is indicative of what they did to Verdugo last year. But last year it was game 1 for both of them. This year it was game 1 for Verdugo. And Verdugo Hills has designs. Coach Jackson knows what he wants out of this team, and he came into the season believing he's going to get it. Where do you go from here? That's the big question.
Yeah.
Their kid Isaiah Remo, sorry for screwing that up. Ran for over 250 yards and had 5 touchdowns.
Yeah.
There's no secret Chatsworth is going to run at you. But you got to contain. Somehow. When it happens, it happens. These are the games that you kind of flush.
Yeah.
But then I also got the question mark of, this is a game I wasn't able to get to, but it was brought to my attention that, their starting quarterback, Donovan Tim, was not at quarterback. And their other option was not playing either. Not playing quarterback or not playing his typical role. And, the question there is we don't know what happened. Not quite sure what was going on in that in that area. Maybe the thought process was, okay, we can play them at tackle because they were thin on line.
Yeah.
If they're thin on the line, then you put your next best option and you go from there. But I'm surprised. That's all. That's literally all I have on that is I'm surprised.
Yeah. So my quick notes for this game.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I'm a proponent of week 0.
Mm-hmm.
Got to schedule somebody week 0 because for what we know for Verdugo Hills is they've got talent there, but they've got a lot of moving pieces. Jackson is confident about his group, but he has some questions where he has to figure out where certain guys fit, who are going to play in certain roles. And Chatsworth is a tough team first week out. They have to try to tinker when you're still kind of tinkering and figuring out, we're going to be okay going forward, but we got to figure out our line situation. We got to figure out who's going to be primarily taking the snaps at QB. What are we going to do at receiver? Like there are questions. They undoubtedly have the talent. They were a playoff team last season and they showed well, but they lost some pieces. There's some new guys having to kind of integrate, and he's got to figure that out. Trying to do that against a Chatsworth team who based on what happened the week before, and I watched that game, they had no business losing to Monroe. All credit to Monroe, like you said. When you're on the road against a team that's supposed to beat you, you don't go into their building and beat yourself. And they didn't. They played discipline. They stood up against the run in the moments they needed to. But Chatsworth had that ball inside of 3 minutes, inside the Monroe 30, in position to salt that game away. And it was penalty after penalty after penalty, and they ended up with a 3rd and forever, ended up having to punt the ball away. And because you put yourself in this position where you selling out to get the ball back, Monroe's quarterback, beautiful keeper, he takes off up the sideline. He's gone. All of a sudden now it's 2013 with a minute to go, and you're looking around like, how did we lose this game? You knew they would be fired up because they didn't want to get 0. They didn't want to go 0-2 out of the gate. And we know they're going to run the ball. That front, if you see those kids up close, those are monsters. They give Chatsworth credit. They have cultivated a real identity. They've got an offensive front that is going to pound you into submission. They know we've got a pet play. We're going to run this toss sweep. We dare you to come up and hit this back. You're not going to want to do it. You might do it the first couple of times, but we're going to test the teams to see if they can do it 3, 4, 5 times in a row. And because Verdugo's still in the testing phase, this first game out of the gate, they got run over a little bit. So I'm not going to count them out yet, but they've got to figure some stuff out because losing 49-7 out of the gate is not going to instill confidence in your fan base that this is a team that's going to challenge for the league. But that's why you got to play week 0. Even if you schedule a little small school that, that might not put up much of a challenge. If you've got questions, you got to get out there, not in a scrimmage, but in some live ammunition and figure some things out. And kudos to Chatsworth for getting that thing back on track. So that's all I got on that game.
Well, I mean, the segues were set up perfectly. Monroe had 2 massive wins
to
start the season. We've touched on what they did to Chatsworth and taking care of their own business. The game was essentially handed to them, and instead of giving it back, they took it.
They took it and put it away.
But then they go out to Marshall and they run over them. And that tells me that this is not, the Marshall last year. This is not the Marshall of the last couple of years. This is a different Marshall. Marshall. This is a different Monroe. Even looking at, what they've got coming up, there's only more chances to prove themselves. I'm looking at, I'm literally looking at what they did, and
Marshall, they moved the ball through the air a little bit.
34 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
And Monroe only gave up 6 yards on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and it kind of goes back to, like I said, not watching this game, but looking at the stat sheet and then going back in my head and what I watched when they played Chatsworth. When you look up and down that roster, there's a lot of seniors on this Monroe team. So this is a lot of kids who have played together for a few years now. They understand what the mission is on any given week. And it is put ourselves in the best position to win. They're disciplined. They're not making a ton of mistakes out there. And they're going to play. They're going to force you to play their game.
mm-hmm.
Chatsworth did everything they could to grind that game to a halt. They were really grinding on the clock, and you could see the Monroe kids were like, that's fine. If this is how you want to play it, we'll stay right here in the pocket. It's fine. And then for them to go on the road the next week, when in certain situations, a team escapes on the road against a team they're not supposed to beat, you go on the road the next week. A lot of times these kids will lay eggs, but not a senior group, not as an experienced group that said, hey, no, we're on to something here. We know how to play. We have an identity. We know who we are. And you take that on the road and you go to Marshall and you lay the hammer on them like that, it just tells you there is another team in the East Valley that we better be paying attention to, because they're when they take the field, they're ready to play.
And that feeds right into, like I said at the top, into our theme for this week is, it's East Valley heavy because there's a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Grant woke everybody up who was sleeping on him. Chavez is who we thought they were, but they're looking stronger than we expected. Monroe is telling everybody that they're not a doormat, and making statement after statement. But that takes us into the other two teams that we haven't touched on, in Arleta and Pauley. You and I were both there week 0 when Arleta got run over by Granada Hills. Now, usually when you walk out of a game like that, your takeaways are, well, that's a team that would run over anybody in our league.
Yeah.
And that's a team that is probably playing open. And what did we do? We put up a fight. And to Arleta's credit, they did not go down.
Yeah.
Against Granada Hills. They fought. But the question comes up for me is, you have a Pauley team who lost to Campbell Hall week 0. And, the scoreline isn't what you would call decent. It was 36-13.
Mm-hmm.
But they bounced back and won in week 1. Pretty decisively, too.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at Arleta, and this is their chance now to bounce back in week 1. And they essentially lay an egg. 42-7. Both teams play Campbell Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, looking at the scorelines, don't have stats for the games yet, but just looking at the scoreline, and the question for me is now, they lost a big runner, and they're integrating 2 quarterbacks, is what it looked like in week 1. have they fallen off? Are they going away from what got them to the big dance for so many years? They were a power run team. They've got that big fullback who
Mhm.
was fighting for yards against Granada Hills. All I have is questions. I'm left with a lot more questions than answers with both teams. Unfortunately, Paulie has Chatsworth next week, so we're not getting answers from. I don't believe we're getting answers from Paulie next week. Yeah.
So here's what I'll say.
Okay.
You got to fight to establish an identity.
Mm-hmm.
You also got to fight to keep it, because the nature of high school sports is you're going to have pieces moving in, you're going to have pieces moving out. You might have a 1 or 2 year window where you get kids. Maybe you get lucky, like Granada has with Dijon Jackson's younger cousin, apparently being a sophomore but playing like he's a senior. Yeah, maybe you get a few of those kids, but for the most part, you rely on your junior, your seniors to kind of take what you've instilled in your program, take those building blocks, and establish who you are. Last year, our leader had established that they were a bully. You know what we're going to do. You can't stop it. They had a bell cow who ran that ball 330 times that year. You couldn't stop him. Even when 8, 9-man boxes, you couldn't stop him. They built a bully. That kid's gone. He's moved on. Hopefully he's getting a shot to play next level somewhere else, because he definitely showed the talent. But now you've got to reestablish that. We saw them wanting to do that in that Granada game. It's really hard once you get down really quickly to then just want to rely on your power run. That's a little difficult to do when you're fighting from 2, 3 scores down very quickly. But like you said, we're integrating 2 quarterbacks. Are you trying to throw the ball more than you have in the past? Because last year they just abandoned the pass altogether. What are you going to do going forward? How do you establish the culture that you've already put in place when you've got new pieces who have to kind of fill in and pick up the slack for people who have now moved on? It's all about building an identity. And then conversely, like you said, talking about Poly, we haven't had a chance to get eyes on them yet. But when you look at a common opponent and then you look at what they did this week, they put up 55 this week.
Yeah.
What that tells you is we know we have it. It might work against some teams. It might not against other teams. We know what we're doing. There's no mistaking what we are. We got our players in place. We're going to take our best shot at you. And that's the only thing you can ask for from the Polys, the Chavezes, the Monroes in the East Valley. Do you have a plan in place to attack teams when you go out there on Friday nights? Can you hang in the game against tougher teams? Can you stick to a game plan? What is your identity? Our leader is still searching for theirs. I mean, they know what they want to be, but can you replicate it on a year after year after year basis? And they've got some work to do.
And I mean, this is probably the first time in a while for them to really have that question. And unfortunately for them, if you're talking league title outside of city, if you're just looking at the league in general, this is not a good year to have questions.
No,
this is not a good year to have questions. I mean, we touched on what Grant is doing. Chavez is not going to be any kind of a pushover. They're stronger than last year.
Oh yeah,
it shows. Monroe is senior heavy, which means they're probably going to be bringing the fight to everybody. And we saw it. They beat Chatsworth.
mm-hmm.
And then they beat Marshall. And now we've got 2 teams that we thought were probably going to be making noise that we got a bunch of questions about. Like 1 week doesn't answer any questions for Verdugo Hills, but it gives me a bunch
Mm-hmm.
more.
Because when you look at the East Valley,
mm-hmm.
a league will turn into the Wild Wild West really quickly if the teams who you expect to be at the bottom are showing you that they've progressed and they're moving up in terms of that level of consistent play, and if the teams at the top start having questions because they have to kind of replicate success they've had in the past with new players, all of a sudden this thing opens up immensely.
I mean,
and it becomes anybody's league.
We could be looking at a 3-2 champion.
Yeah.
And that would be saying something about the league as a whole. If your champion limps out at 3-2, could mean for a hell of a playoff run, though.
Oh yeah,
they're battle tested at that point.
I give you a great. I have to cut you off, but I give you a great example. When you look at what happened in the West Valley last year, those teams below Birmingham beat each other up all league. When you looked at that league, they beat each other up. And then what happened when they got in the playoffs? 3 of the 4 city titles came out of that league. And it was because we've been kicking each other's ass all year long. When we get out here in the playoffs, it's been do or die for the last 4 or 5 weeks when we've been out on the field. Taft went on a run. We didn't see it coming. They went 0-5 in their league. They went and walked to a Division III title. Elko. Like these schools, when you get these years where everyone has to beat each other up and you have to go through every game in your league turns into a gauntlet, by the time you hit the playoffs, you're already in playoff mode. You've been in playoff mode for a month. You spent the entire month of October in playoff mode because you knew every game meant I could finish first or I could finish fourth in my own league. So it's gonna be fun to see where these teams kind of go from there. Like you said, that game next week against Chatsworth for Poly, we're not expecting them to win that game. But are you going to have the Verdugo outcome where you just get run out of the building, or are you going to hold your water the way we saw Monroe do week 1 or week 0?
Yeah,
that's going to be the question for Poly. If Poly goes in there, plays that Chatsworth team and plays them tough, we're going to come out looking at Poly and saying, okay, you guys are going to have a fight on your hands when you play against them. So that's going to be interesting.
And I mean, at that point, we go from having right now what looks like, 3 surprises to having 4 surprises. And then it's wide open.
Yeah.
And surprises, that takes me to our game of the week because I'm surprised.
Yeah.
We expected Birmingham to win last week in week 0. Not necessarily a powerhouse team. It was a game that they controlled for the most part, and they basically gave it away.
Yeah.
Notre Dame and Sherman Oaks is not the powerhouse they used to be, but they're definitely not a pushover in any way. This is a team that's going to win games. This is a team that's going to make noise. But Birmingham's job was to show that they learned from their mistakes and that they were going to come out and they were going to take control and they were going to hold it. They fought. I mean, they fought. They scored first in both halves. Had momentum to start each first and third quarter, but getting into the second and getting into the fourth, it seemed like they faded. They have playmakers. So the question for me looking at Birmingham right now is this a repeat of their 0-5 start in non-league, and then they just bullied their way to a league title and an open division title? Or are we looking at something else? I mean, Peyton Waters, 2 touchdowns. He opened the scoring with an 89-yard catch and run. So the talent's there.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not doubting the coaching staff. I mean, this is a tried and true team.
Yeah.
But when we get between the lines, and I'm looking at these first two games, and my takeaway is, did they open the door for these other teams to say, hey, maybe we can knock off Birmingham?
And the thing is, okay, like you said, looking at Notre Dame, yes, they compete. They're a Southern Section team, so it always gets dicey because when you're dealing with Southern Section teams, it's damn near like what you're seeing in college football now with the transfer portal. 1 year to the next, you get 3 or 4 kids that come in and change your complete program around because this guy wasn't getting time at Oaks Christian or this guy wasn't getting time here. Well, he didn't want to be at Crespi, so you get 3 or 4 of those kids all together, and all of a sudden you turn around, boom, you're rolling. But Notre Dame, as I look at them, if you are a top 5 team in the city section, if you are Birmingham, if you're Banning, if you're San Pedro, if you're Venice, if you're Palisades, if you're those teams, Notre Dame is a team that's going to give you a game, but you should beat them. The top 5 to 7 schools in the city section should beat Notre Dame if you play. That's not Bosco coming in your building. You got to handle business because you're expected to. Those teams who slot in that open division playoff, that team that gets designated that top 8, you're supposed to go play and beat anybody. Now, here's the thing, like you said, they're a talented bunch, but you still got to play consistent. You can't play up and down because you're getting everyone's best shot. You win your league 5 years in a row. You're the reigning kings of the city. You're getting the best shot every week. And you've got the talent to do it, even with Arliss Bordenham going to Florida. Even with losing a quarterback who was, I think he was first team All-City, their starting quarterback last year. Yeah, of course. But if there's any team that's shown like, hey, listen, we just restocked the cupboard, it's Birmingham. So that the talent's not an excuse. But what you look at these first 2 weeks and you look at what they've got going forward, you're right. If you're going to be play up and down and you can't put 4 quarters together, you're going to be 0-5 when you get in the league. You might be a little beat up by the time you get into the league. Like I said, it's not going to get any easier next week when you go see that Chaminade team because they got kids that I want to check birth certificates over there. You've got to find, they've got a week now to kind of look at what has gone on the first 2 weeks and kind of figure this out and get it together. I know week 0, a kid who was starting the quarterback got hurt, so it kind of kicked off that backup kind of getting thrust into the spotlight. Maybe he was ready, maybe he wasn't. But you have got to play consistent because, yes, like you alluded to, Cleveland is peeking at them around the corner and saying, okay, we see you guys. Corey Hall is standing there probably looking up and down Birmingham's roster and like, I can beat him. He ain't better than me. That guy, yeah, they're talking about him. I let him come around the corner and see what happens. That's what they're going to deal with this year. They have got teams in their league that are seeing if you guys take a half step backwards, we're on your butts. We're right here. So it does make for an interesting September in terms of how this stuff's all going to fall for them going forward because you just never know. You just never know. And that is a heavy position to be in when you're expected to win on a week-to-week basis. Even though, and kudos to that coaching staff, they load that non-league because they want people to understand and know, like, hey, we don't rest on our laurels here. We're going out and we're playing tough teams because there's an expectation with that Patriots program that they're going to compete and they're going to win. And they're going to win city titles. They're going to send kids to D1 schools. They're going to send kids all over the place. That's the expectation in this program. But once you start getting everybody's best shot, if that consistent level of play is not there, you're going to find yourself in trouble.
and the phrase is kind of overused, but it's no truer than ever before. Iron sharpens iron,
Mm-hmm.
and that Birmingham team is going to stack and try to make sure that they're sharp, come league, because like we said, El Camino's out to get them. Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no rest for the weary.
Oh no, they got to stop that Cleveland run game.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan Powell.
Oof.
I will beat that Corey Hall drum.
Oh.
I will beat it. I saw him. I saw him Friday night. You saw him the week before. Yeah, people were sleeping on him. I'll beat that drum and wake everyone up.
And he's a junior.
And he's a junior.
So there's still a lot more to come from this.
We got another year, and imagine another year of maturity.
Oof.
And then you look at Donovan Powell, and he did this 2 weeks in a row. So now you've got Corey Hall on both sides of the ball. Donovan Powell coming at you, and he's shifty.
Mm-hmm.
He will make a move, make you miss, and if you blink, he's gone.
And to a bigger point about that program,
mm-hmm.
when you talk to Gunny, there's an energy around that program right now. But they know this is the time. I was there for that week 0 game, and even the atmosphere at that school place was packed out. Everyone's there, and there's an excitement around them, from the players to parents to alumni. They know that they're building something there where they're looking at Birmingham and they're saying, listen, we're not scared of you. We know who you are, who you're supposed to be. We're not scared. And when we get when we get in between those lines, we're giving you a fight. So, I mean, like I said, you don't want to beat up on Birmingham too much because, like I said, last year they went 0-5 non-league, and then they just ran through everything after that.
Yeah.
So there's a part of it is they are figuring some things out. They are playing tough non-league opponents because that's how they prepare themselves for the familiarity that comes from having to deal with these coaches and players who know you in your own league.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a little disappointing because it feels like these were 2 games on their schedule that they should have got W's. And it just leaves the door open. The last thing you want is for teams that you think are inferior to you to feel like they've really got a shot when you come in. I imagine the last few years, if you were playing against Birmingham, as soon as you saw that navy and gold come out on the field, you already felt there was an intimidation factor. You just, first of all, if you ever saw Arliss Bordenham in person, he was scary just looking at him. Before he starts Randy Mossing people and then stiff arming you and going 70 yards down the field, there was an intimidation factor just with that program in general. You never want to lose that shine where now teams are not scared when they come to face you. So, and they've got 2 teams in that league that, just based on what they've done to start the year, are probably looking at Birmingham on the schedule and saying, oh, we can get them when we play. So,
yeah. And that brings us up to our next step. And we've talked about these players kind of up and down already.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to put our shine on the player of the week.
Okay.
And I've got a short list. I've got 3. And honestly, for me, it's almost a toss-up.
Yeah.
Almost. You got Isaiah Ramo from Chatsworth putting up over 250 yards and 5 touchdowns.
Monster.
But then how do you forget about Donovan Powell?
Yeah.
355 yards. And if you remove, which you shouldn't, but if you remove that big run at the end, the 99-yarder, he still put up over 250 yards.
Yeah.
He still put up 250
That's still 250. Yeah.
That's still 250. So he deserves to be in the conversation. And then you got a good look at him, 2 weeks in a row now. Gore Abrahamian.
Yeah.
He couldn't be stopped yesterday, Friday.
And he as a runner, when you watch this kid run the ball, I don't look it now, but I was a DB in high school. The last thing you want to see is a thick running back coming off that edge, and your job is to go up there and stick your nose in the fire and put him down. There was something about the visuals, that old school 3 yards in a cloud of dust, right? You're watching him play on that field at Kennedy, and just it felt like every time, boom, he come up, he cracked. It took 2 or 3 people to put him down, and you just see that cloud of dust come up, and he just emerges from the cloud of dust and just looking at the Chavez guys like, I'm coming back. I'll be back next play. Maybe they give me a snap off, but I'm getting this ball again. And there's something about that aura, that presence of a player that you know is a tough-nosed player. Like I said, shout out to him. His handle on, I was telling you last night, his handle on Instagram, he calls himself the Gorilla. And he embodies every bit of that. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm in agreement that those 3 are a short list. The only guy I would add as an honorable mention, even though he didn't have the biggest game, but what Dijon Jackson did in putting that Westchester game away to send Granada Hills to 2-0. He put that team on his back again, and he basically put that game away. Westchester's a tough opponent to deal with anyway. And then you go into their building, and that kid once again said, hey, listen, I'm going to carry us to the promised land. It's fine. And he had a drive where just about every touch is going to be in his hands, and he had the touchdown that put the game away. So he's an honorable mention.
And, I mean, he would tack on to a couple others that I have as notables. Peyton Waters at Birmingham.
Yeah.
Came away with 2 touchdowns. Like we said, he had that big 89-yarder to open the scoring. And I had to put in 2 kids from Grant. I had to. There's no way I can overlook Jaquel Woodard and Johannes Tandrasia. Like, you're talking a combined 272 yards on the ground. They had 3 of the 4 touchdowns the team scored. And, I told you, Coach said, Tandrasia met the tackle at the 5, stood him up, and ran over him to score. But I also saw this kid breaking and fighting and pushing, and he had a huge 30-yard run that got them to the 11 right before that 4-play drive where they just, I'm not going to talk about the measurement, but he had the run that got them there.
Yeah.
And Woodard scored he scored the last touchdown that put them at 27 when it was 27-20 right before Cleveland came back. So, these are 2 horses.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more. Yeah. I'm looking forward. So that brings us to our last spot of the day. And we're looking ahead, not just to this week, but we're looking at kind of what is coming down the pipe and what we're looking at with some of these programs. And if they've got questions to be answered, and what's coming around. The only one thing I'm going to add into that is we're not talking about it yet, but I'm very, very curious about Cleveland Reseda on Thursday.
Yeah.
Because Austin has really, really tried to put a stamp on this program, and they had two tough matches to start the season.
Mm-hmm.
You get Fairfax and Dorsey, and then you get Cleveland as number 3, especially after Cleveland's done.
Yeah.
But I will say, Austin Ward got that team playing his brand of football, and they fought against Fairfax when I was there. So I'm expecting another fight against Cleveland. And that'll tell us kind of what we're looking at when they get into Valley Mission play. And there's other questions to be answered coming down, but we'll break down the gems later. I'm really curious. What are you looking at moving forward?
So, staying in that vein, talking about Reseda, I'm really paying attention to that Valley Mission because, similar to what we talked about with the East Valley, that thing so far looks like it's a wide open race. Reseda, Austin's trying to kind of put his stamp on the program and deal with how much they lost, replacing that talent, and kind of trying to stay on that same path. But I'm looking at how Canoga started the year. I'm looking at how some of these teams that you expected to be those front runners have not necessarily looked the part. Meanwhile, you've got Panorama out here starting 2-0, and similar to what we've seen with Monroe and Poly, looking like they might be able to make a little noise and kind of shake up the middle of that league and maybe even challenge for the top, depending on how things kind of should pan out with the teams who have been in the top of that league the last couple of years. So I'm definitely paying attention to that. What I'm also interested and intrigued in going forward, and we'll kind of get into it later this week, and when we talk about those Valley Gems pieces, in the Valley Gems piece. Granada has intrigued me with how they've started. It remains to be seen if they're really ready to challenge a Birmingham and challenge for a city title. But they've got a game this week that's a big litmus test for them on Thursday, because they've got one of the teams that everybody considers to be a top team in the city coming into their backyard for their home opener on Thursday when they see Palisades. I don't know if I'm necessarily expecting them to win because Palisades is really good, but can Deshaun Jackson and that group kind of continue to establish themselves as, no, we're building something here. Bucky Brooks is there. There's an energy sort of around that school and that team. Are they for real? We're going to find out in the next couple of weeks going in the league. Are they for real? Same thing with Cleveland. Here's another test for them. They come out and they go put a beating on Reseda. We're going to be right back next week saying, hey, Birmingham, what you got? Also for them, they've got Chaminade. There is a lot of, as we're now getting into week 2, we're starting to line up some litmus tests for some of these teams that we expect to do well, and it's going to be time for them to show improve going forward. So those are some of the things that I'm looking ahead, that I'm looking forward to this week. And also, we didn't touch on them. Elko has had a pretty rough start to things, but this week sort of represents a chance for them kind of right the ship a little bit, because they're going to play Calabasas. And I think sometimes in a football season, you get all it takes is that one big effort, that one big win, and kind of snap you out of it and say, okay, you know what? Yeah, no, we did win. You know what? We did win a city title last year. We're better than what we've shown, and kind of get things turned around. So it's going to be tough, kind of narrowing down the Valley Gems, I think, because we've got a lot of good non-league contests this week with some questions that we're going to want answered. Hell, even throw Polly in that mix. They got to go see this Chatsworth team, who is, I guess, running the gamut in the East Valley in terms of their run of play so far. So, yeah, those are things I'm looking forward to.
I mean, I've got at least 6 or 7 on the short list. You know, how we narrow that down to 5 or 6, or less, just depending on, okay, this is the focus.
Yeah.
You know, what are we seeing? And what we're seeing is a lot of teams are saying, no, you need to look at us.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's exciting because these programs are putting these kids in positions, and these kids are taking advantage, and they're opening eyes all across the valley, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And then they'll be opening eyes across the city, come mid-late October and November, when they're like, no, you slept on us, and let me show you who we are. So it's shaping up to be another big week.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for the time. I mean, we ran the gamut. We've got a lot of excitement building up, and I look forward to doing this again with you next week when we look back on some of these games and really put together, okay, 3 weeks in, are we starting to separate pretenders from contenders?
Oh yeah. And my last note that I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we started this, and the reason why we wanted to do this, is because there's good football in the Valley. There's good sports in the Valley. And these kids deserve the shine and the recognition and the time and people to come out and watch them play. So the way I think I'm going to sign off every week is that the Valley's got players too. That's all I'll say.
And I'll second that. Week in, week out. Don't sleep on the Valley.
Don't sleep on the Valley.
Well, see you next week.